The Hub.
This is HubCityDre. This is the Hub Radio, and we are doing an exclusive interview with candidate for District 2, uh, LA County's Board of Supervisor, Senator Holly J. Mitchell is with me today. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you again for taking the time. I know this is like going right into the weekend of the election. This is the last few days.
This is the last push.
How
After
are you feeling about
Tuesday,
it?
I was going to say after Tuesday, everybody's TV can return to them. You don't have to see all those political ads, running morning, noon, and night. I feel good. I am thrilled when I look at the numbers of people statewide in the second supervisorial district in LA County that have turned out for early voting. It's amazing. Like 35% of the people who are registered have already
Nice.
voted. That they're breaking records. I think that's symbolic of people really wanting to, be engaged and have their voice heard, which is the most important thing. It's our fundamental right.
Right. So now, first off, let me ask, how are you doing personally?
I appreciate that. I'm doing well. I'm energized. I'm excited. This is hard work. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Um, but it's important work and critical work to really bring about some change in my community. But I'm well.
Now, how has it been campaigning during the pandemic versus campaigning outside of pandemic?
It's completely different and yet sometimes the same. This is uncharted territory. No one's had to figure this out in recent history, right? Um, when I say it's the same, we're still connecting with voters. I'm talking to voters every day. I'm talking to constituents every day with my day job as a state senator who are looking for my help and the help of my team in the Senate office navigating state services during this public health and economic pandemic. So I'm still doing that work, trying to help people access EDD services. I partnered with St. John's and LAUSD and other nonprofit organizations to bring testing to the community in areas where
Right.
we saw that there wasn't adequate testing. So that's still happening, right? That's your everyday work. And then as a candidate, trying to connect with voters. And so we're doing it through phone banking. We've got volunteer-led banks running 7 days a week. The
Nice.
use of technology. I've had amazing IG conversations with, social activists and social justice leaders. We're using every social media platform from Facebook to Twitter, StreamYard, uh,
So would you consider these pros or
technology.
cons at this point?
Let me tell you, I think they're pros
Okay.
because it allows you to connect with people that you might not connect with otherwise. Think about yourself. You're going to show up to a political rally or a fundraiser for someone that you already know something about and are probably already inclined to support, right?
Right.
But to be able to, in the luxury of your own home or wherever, tap into a Zoom, tap into a community conversation, you might be more inclined to do that because your neighbor or your friend invited you, and you might
Hmm.
not know anything about the candidate. So I think I've been able to touch voters that I otherwise would not have. I
Okay,
think
so let
we're
me
all
ask.
so used to the door to door. That's just kind of our historic way of doing it. And so I
Right.
think people are like, are you going door to door? That's because that's what we know. But we are coming up with other ways to reach out to voters. We're gone old school and doing postcarding. I've got
Mhm.
some of, my seniors who support me, some of my mother's, homegirls who are doing postcarding. So, it's a little new, it's a little old.
Got it. Now, it's funny that you mentioned reaching first-time voters. The Hub Radio in the last election helped raise the voter turnout about 60%, and we were just a part of it. Um, a lot of those were first-time voters. What would you tell a first-time voter uh, that's not familiar with you or your opponent, what factors should he or she consider when voting for either you or your opponent?
That is a great question and an important one. And when we talk about first-time voters, I think people automatically assume they're, kids who just turned 18, but that's not the case. We have first-time voters that span, the age group. And so it really is asking people to think about what's important to them. I think before COVID-19, one could argue that there were some folks who thought, government doesn't touch my life. And elected officials, they're all this or all that. But COVID brought it home for all of us when it was a government decision, the decision of an elected official to close schools, to close our houses of worship, to tell some of us to stay home, to name others of us essential workers. Those were all decisions made by an elected official at some level of government. And so I think that's indicative of the role government plays in our life every day. I would say to people that elections cannot be popularity contests. You have to think of it as a voter, as a job interview, and ask tough questions that are relevant to you. What's your position on police accountability and transparency? What have you done in that space?
Right.
What do you think about gentrification, Senator Mitchell? What have you done about housing affordability? Do you know, Senator Mitchell, about what it costs me to pay rent and childcare and try to survive? Working a full-time job and maybe having a side hustle. Um, it's important to talk to people to make sure that we understand um, your struggle and that we're able to articulate the role government plays in your life. And then you've got to ask us those tough questions, those examples I gave around childcare, affordability and access, being in the forefront around criminal justice and juvenile justice reform, holding law enforcement accountable based on bills I have voted on and carried,
Mm-hmm.
actions I've taken as budget chair. Those are all actions that I've taken in my last 10 years as a legislator. And I hope people will, thanks to social media, you can Google my opponent's name, my name, and find out all those important things that I've done on behalf of my community.
Now, it's a race now between you and Councilman Wesson.
Correct.
What makes you more qualified
Mhm.
to take this District 2 seat?
Mr. Weston has been a long-term public servant, and I tip my hat. We're different. We have focused on different policy areas. He talks about, and it's true that he was elected Speaker of the State Assembly and President of the Council, and that he's a deal maker. He cuts deals. I'm a policy maker. I chaired the budget committee. I've just taken a different kind of direction in my elected kind of career, where the reason I ran for office was because I was the CEO of Crystal Stairs, child care agency here in
Right.
LA, South Los Angeles. And the legislature was proposing to cut $1 billion out of child care. And I knew what that was going to do to families and child care providers in my community. And I got mad enough and afraid enough to run for the assembly. So I sought public office to problem solve. I sought public office to bring resources back to my community. Have served on the budget committee, first African American and second woman since statehood to chair the Senate Budget Committee. And I've got a solid track record, particularly in the areas that the county does the work in. Every elected office isn't the same. The
Right.
city has their body of work, the state has their body of work. So when you look at who I want to elect to the Board of Supervisors, who has the experience in that work? So I've done the work around probation and CalWorks and foster care and child welfare services. Those are the policy areas I've done the work. To have chaired a $225 billion budget, to be able to come home to LA County and have influence over a $37 billion budget, I've got that direct experience. So I think the question really is, who has the experience to do this job?
Hmm.
How can we look at their past work and, connect some dots to make sure that they're the right person at the right time to do this work?
Now, speaking on you and this budget, from 2017, you've overseen budgets close to $215 billion each. So you've
Yes.
balanced some pretty big budgets.
Mhm.
And the LA Times actually deemed you as the legislator moral compass. I wanted to know, with that being said, and
Mhm.
all the social justice issues going on, what's your
Mhm.
position on defunding the police or sheriff's
So,
department?
yeah, you know what? I just want to share a quote. I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago with the incomparable Angela Davis, and
Mm,
she said this, and I quote, defund the police is an abbreviated demand for rethinking our social infrastructure. And I couldn't agree more. From my perspective, we have allowed all of us, the collective we, elected officials, everybody, has allowed our criminal justice system to become this backstop
mhm.
that when other systems fail, the criminal justice system will catch you like a backstop. When our education system fails, boom. When our mental health system fails, when our ability and willingness to house people who can't afford housing fails, boom. And so we have to stand up these other systems of government to prevent people from hitting that backstop.
Mhm.
It is tragic that we've gotten to a point as a county, as a society, where if someone is having a mental health crisis on the street, we call the police. If a young person, um, if their foster care placement is failing them, people tend to say, oh, they failed their placement. This placement failed them.
Mm.
What does that foster parent do? Or what does that group home counselor do? They call the police. Um, when people get sick of tent cities on their block, or they feel threatened or afraid or don't know what to do, they call the police. That's what we have to stop. We have to give ourselves and everybody other options. So there needs to be a mental health crisis team, a social worker who is trained, that those are the people who are our first responders when people are in crisis. The police need to be the first responder when people are in danger. There's a difference between being in crisis and in danger,
Mhm.
right? And so we would organically, naturally reduce the funding for the police department if we change their workload to being focused on what they all signed up and trained for in the first place, which is to prevent criminal
Right.
activity. Being in a mental health crisis, being homeless is not criminal activity. And we
Right.
have to stop treating it like it is. And so I think what we don't talk enough about is we have to demilitarize the police, because
Okay.
when we saw that armor they suited up in to, for these peaceful protests, you
Right.
know, the rubber bullets, all of that artillery they brought into play, that I believe needs to go away. There are few and far between instances where that kind of very expensive artillery is necessary. So we need to demilitarize the police. We need to fund the social infrastructure that we all are entitled to and need, and is the fundamental role of government. And then defund the police, because they would be able to narrow their focus in terms of the work they do.
Now, is there a plan maybe in place
Mhm.
to bring forth everything that you just spoke about?
Absolutely. And I'm so proud of the Board of Supervisors and really the community stakeholders who really, I was about to say forced, encouraged the sitting board to do it. And that's Measure J. It's on the ballot this November. And
Okay.
Measure J at the county level is the initiative that will say that 10% of the county's budget will go to all of these kind of prevention and early intervention services I talk to. So it's basically saying, Board of Supervisors, you got to carve out 10%. And I would argue that people shouldn't perceive the 10% as the ceiling. 10% may be the floor. It may take us more than 10% of the budget that we have to redirect to set up these important government infrastructures, particularly now after COVID, because coming out of this for the second district, the district that was disproportionately hit by the virus and the economic fallout, it's going to take real investment to bring us back. And I happen to believe that if the second people who live in the second supervisorial district had a disproportionate impact of COVID, then they should be entitled to a disproportionate investment of public funds to help us navigate our way out of this.
Okay. Now, the LA County Charter says that the LA County supervisors can impeach the sheriff with a 4/5 majority. What's your opinion on that?
I have been very public about my deep concern about the direction the sheriff is leading his department. I've said that publicly. I applauded the two members of the board who called for his resignation early on. I've been very clear that we have a problem, when there's a sheriff who refuses to cooperate with the Oversight Commission, which is the commission that we as citizens believe, like, they're the ones that shed light, and that's our accountability and transparency in the department. And so when the head of the department refuses to go when he's called to even have a conversation, problem number one. Problem number two, when he refuses to allow the inspector general, who is this independent, kind of eyes and ears, to go to crime scenes and do kind of a parallel investigation when there's a police involved shooting, when he's refused to let the inspector general do his job at the crime scene, problem. That says to me that this is someone who is in denial about how he and his department are perceived by major sectors of our community. And when the public can't trust and loses confidence in law enforcement, public safety is compromised.
Right.
I have too many conversations with community residents who are like, I'm afraid to call the police. I'm afraid to call the sheriff because I don't want their presence to escalate an already tenuous situation worse. That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. Yeah. And his refusal to acknowledge that any element of that might be true is a problem. So I've said that he needed to resign months ago. And so, he is a duly elected official. However, his budget comes out of the Board of Supervisors. And the payment for the lawsuits that we lose out of his department come out of the county budget too. That means the Board of Supervisors has control over the purse strings. And so there needs to be a little better coordination and mutual signs of mutual respect between the two.
So what do you think about removing quality immunity?
I have supported that. I've voted on a number of pieces of legislation to really begin to look at this peace officer Bill of Rights. I understand the unique role they play in society and the dangerous role they play in society. I think the pendulum has swung too far, however, where we give them a level of blanket rights and protections that far exceed a private citizen, far exceed. Right. We have to do better in terms of not only training. We spend a lot of time in the state legislature adding training hours, adding training dollars, training for domestic violence, training for implicit bias. we also need to do a better job of who we recruit in the first place.
Can I ask you a question about how much money we may have paid out in lawsuits relating to police brutality, maybe within the last couple years?
A figure I read recently, and I believe it was a figure for this year, and that was in the tune of $80 million. But accumulatively over the last number of years, I don't know. And I
I
think
mean, if
it's a
just this year
number,
alone is 80 million, that says a
right?
lot.
And that's a figure that says a lot. That's a figure I read someplace. I can't give you the citation, unfortunately, because I can't remember where I saw it. But if it's anywhere near that number, um, that's staggering.
Yeah,
That's
right.
staggering when you think, because remember where that money comes from. You and me.
Hmm.
Government is funded based on, the general public. That's why I'm a public servant as an elected official. My salary, that budget comes from sales tax, property tax, personal tax. That's where government gets its money. Those are our dollars. And I
Let me.
appreciate this notion that when you're a public servant and you're doing the public's job, that your employer should provide some protections for you. But we've got to get clear if this is someone that your employer has failed to discipline, to be clear and make public about a consistency in their track record of being, bad apples, to use that term loosely, then we have a different kind of problem.
I want to steer away a little bit from the police and sheriff conversation. Still within the budget, though. Uh, what economic impact do you see COVID playing in 2021?
So, um,
And let me add to this. And what role do you see the county facilitating to help the community and small businesses bounce back? So let me just add that to that.
excellent, excellent. At the state level, the governor released his budget January of 2020. We were coming off of a 10-year run. We had record high reserve and rainy day funds where when the economy was good, we were paying down future debt, paying down pension debt, and socking money away. I created a rainy day fund for the entitlement programs for CalWorks, because those are the first programs we cut when the economy tanks and government is broke. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a rainy day fund for those entitlement programs, because those are the programs people rely on when the economy is bad. That's when our CalWorks numbers go up and CalFresh food stamps. So the governor came back in May and said, okay, now we have a $54 billion deficit. And he proposed a series of cuts. Well, the problem was so many of those cuts were on programs that people need who were being impacted by COVID. So we said, we cannot cut public education. We cannot lay off school teachers. In fact, we have to invest in childcare because we have to expand childcare availability for these essential workers. We cannot cut funding to King Hospital, which was proposed. So I stood up and fought against that. So there was no state cut to King Hospital. So this year we were able to cover it by spending down half of our rainy day fund and those reserves. That's what you have savings accounts for, right? To spend
Right.
it when you're in trouble, and we were in trouble. The fear is on a go forward basis, recognizing that we've not been able to open up our economy fully. Yesterday, LA County had the highest positive, rate in since we've been shut down. So we keep having this kind of these peaks and valleys that we do well,
Right.
people are wearing their masks, and then something happens and our numbers shoot back up. So, the danger is schools will not be able to open fully. People will not be able to go back to work. The economy and small businesses will not be able to fully reopen until we get our numbers consistently low. And that's taking longer than anybody ever anticipated, which means our recovery is going to take longer. The LA Times reported yesterday that LAUSD doesn't think they're going to go back this year at all. We're looking now into 2021. Kids will have been out of school almost a year. And the impact that has on their parents' ability to work is staggering.
Right.
And so we're going to need the federal government to step up, to bring resources to the table for state and local government. The state will continue to step up to help the county, because the county took a hit because a major source of the county's income is sales tax. We were shut down. There was no place you could go buy anything to pay sales tax. You don't pay sales tax on food, right? And so the county's budget has taken a hit. I don't know to what degree that hit is. I don't have access, to that budget quite yet. I hope to if I'm elected on Tuesday. And so the county's going to take a hit. So the federal government, the Congress has been fighting over the stimulus package to help us now, to extend unemployment insurance payments, and to talk about what role they're going to do to help local government. If those dollars come in, I know the county will be in a position to step up and provide grants or low interest loans, or even paycheck protection plans like the federal government did, to businesses. And every level of government is going to do that. The state did it. We put up 50 million in the iBank when we realized the paycheck protection plan wasn't helping many of the small businesses in my community. Those big businesses were the first ones to qualify for those dollars. So the state stepped in for micro businesses, and even for businesses, operating by our immigrant brothers and sisters. The federal government has completely ignored that community through this whole crisis. When we recognize the percentage of LA County residents that are residents, are immigrants, or non-citizen immigrants, we know that that's a portion of the population government has to figure out how to support too. So I have faith the county will do it. Monies will have to come from the federal government to help us. And if elected to the Board of Supervisors, one of the first things I would do would be to convene all the mayors of cities within the 2nd district. There are 9 cities within the 2nd supervisorial district. So I have to sit down and talk to the mayor of Inglewood, Mayor Butts, the mayor of Carson, Mayor Robles, Mayor Brown of Compton, Culver City mayor, and the city of LA mayor, to hear firsthand from them at the city level. Give me a snapshot of what your residents and the businesses in your cities are facing, and what have you done as a city, and where do you need help from the county? So the first thing would be to sit down with those elected leaders to see where they are. The federal government came in for cities over a certain population, and those cities got direct funds from the federal government. LA City qualified because we're so large. None of the other 8 cities in the district were large enough to qualify from those federal dollars. So we have to step in to make sure that those cities and city government is kept whole as well. It's a lot to do.
Okay. Let's move to homelessness really quick.
Mm-hmm.
All cities are under an unfunded mandate to come up with a affordable housing and shelter. What type of state legislation would you support to help fund this unfunded mandate?
I'm very proud of the work that the state has stepped up to do in the last several years, some of which was under my leadership as chair of the budget committee. We stepped up in a meaningful way. The mayors of the big 11 cities in the state of California came to us 2 years ago with a plan and a request for help for the state. And they asked for flexibility. Sometimes government can get so prescriptive. We're going to give you this amount of dollars, but you can only spend it like this. And that doesn't help. California is so diverse. What works for LA may not work for Oakland or Berkeley, and vice versa. And so the mayor said, give us some flexibility. Establish some goals you want us to meet. You want us to reduce the number of unhoused by X%, and then let us do what's best for our city. And we did that. The mayor of Berkeley, Mayor Libby Schaaf, built tiny houses. Mayor Garcetti of LA built bridge housing. They all built what their own municipalities really needed. They came back the next year and it grew to the big 13 mayors. They added Stockton in another city, and we did the same thing. I was very proud of the leadership of the governor, and I was able to stand by him when COVID hit to come up with Operation Room Key, where we sent hundreds of millions of dollars to LA County specifically to rent hotel and motel rooms for our unhoused to get them off of the street immediately. You know, the beauty of H and HHH is it's given us, you know, new resources to build permanent supportive housing, but that takes a minute. And we don't have time when people are dying every day, literally languishing on the streets of LA. We have now transitioned Operation Room Key to Operation Home Key. And again, in partnership with the governor, have allocated hundreds of millions more in an immediate effort to purchase hotels and motels and transition them into permanent supportive housing. The construction is still happening across LA County, but it takes a while, and some people just can't afford to wait. The other piece that we haven't done enough of that I would want to bring to the table if elected is to help people stay where they are. So many of our people are in precarious housing situations. You know, the first is Sunday and rent's due. And there's so many people whose housing is just really, they're on thin ice. Right. Figuring out how to keep those people housed so we don't add to our numbers of the unhoused is another strategy. In the city of LA, for every 100 they house a day, 112 new people hit the streets. So we have to stem that tide, come up with rapid rehousing, come up with providing people resources to help them stay where they are. You know, the Federal Reserve Bank released a study about a year ago that said that 40% of Americans aren't prepared for a $400 unanticipated expense in a month. That's like half of the country. And so when you realize that people are really living paycheck to paycheck, that it might take a really small investment of dollars to help people stabilize that month. You know, maybe something happened to the car, you're pulling from the rent money because you've got to keep the car to be able to get to work. Well, then if we could give you that amount of money, maybe that'll help bridge you. So sometimes it's small investments. You know, if we can get the paycheck loan people with the outrageous interest rates they charge out of the way and come up with, to use the new public bank system to come up with, you know, a loan, you know, 1% interest, you have a year to pay it back, you know, something like that, that's more manageable. I think those are additional strategies to help people stay in housing, help us expedite building new housing for people who need it.
All right, now I want to go through a couple propositions with you. Okay. And I won't, this will be our last. I just want to go through a couple propositions, see where you stand on these.
Okay.
So we have,
and so just so you know, I've taken public stances on some, but not all. So if it's one I haven't taken a public position on, I'll just let you know.
Okay. All right. Proposition 16 then.
Oh, please. Yes, and more yes.
Okay. So and let me ask a question for me personally. Well, first let me say Proposition 16 would allow public colleges, universities, and agencies to include race, sex, color, ethnicity, and country of origin in their decision-making process. Now, I wonder personally, although that this could be used in our benefit, could this also be used against us?
The short answer to that, from my perspective, is no, because we have the data. You know, what this initiative does is it takes us back in time to before the passage of Prop 209, 24 years ago. And we can look at the data in terms of the number of minority students, women who were accepted into our publicly funded colleges and universities. We can look at the number of Black students admitted to the UC system, to not only undergrad. Let me tell you how 209 has hurt us. The graduate schools, the state bar is still one of the least diverse sectors in this state. White men still dominate the practice of law in this state. And when we look back at the loss of equity in admissions to law school, the loss of equity of admissions to medical schools, it's hurt us. And we probably will take a generation or two to recover, quite frankly. This is not about quotas. Quotas were never legal. This is about equity, creating an opportunity of equity for admissions into these schools. The other piece that people don't often talk about, which has had an equally devastating impact on women and communities of color, were the contracting elements. You know, for minority and women-owned businesses to get equal access to major government contracts, that was lost when 209 passed. And when we talk about small businesses and the economic engine that helps elevate our communities, when we talk about gentrification and housing affordability, you know, it really is an issue of economics. And if we as minority and women-owned small businesses don't have access to capital or access to those contracting opportunities, you know, the county of LA, I have no idea, I'm sure it's billions of dollars of contracts that they issue in terms of the nature of the work they do. And so to create an opportunity for minority and women-owned businesses to not have to come in as subcontractors, but to be the principal contractor to help grow and expand their business is significant. That is what 209 did to us as a community, as a people. I think people focused on the education element, but it had that other piece too. So Prop 69 simply reverses that. And I don't think it will harm us because we have the data that shows our rates of admissions to these schools, the percentages of women and minority-owned businesses that got those contracts before 209 passed. And they were significantly higher than they've been over the last 24 years.
Thank you for clearing that up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Prop 17 would allow people on parole to register to vote and vote in elections. Certain people on parole would be now allowed to run for public office. Do you have a public stance on that?
Yes, 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 yes. I fully support that. You know, this notion, once you have paid your debt to society, and if we want to reduce recidivism and welcome people home, we have to take the shackles off their feet. And if you are working and contributing and paying taxes, you have a right to vote, to elect the people who represent you. You have the right to run for office, absolutely. And so I was proud to vote on the assembly bill that actually qualified, that got this to the ballot. I was a co-author on it, AB 1185. And so I absolutely support Prop 17.
Okay. All right. I have two more for you.
Okay.
Prop 20, which is the tough on crime proposition. And this will increase penalties for certain theft crimes, harder for people to get out of prison on parole, require government to collect DNA samples from those convicted or suspected of misdemeanors, not just felonies.
Mitchell is a no. No. This is an effort by some members of the legislature and some special interest group to really reverse some of the important work we've done on criminal justice reform. This is trying to take us back pre-Prop 47. The proponents of this initiative are claiming, you know, that petty theft is up, And none of that is really true consistently across the state. And so this is a reversal of a decade plus of work that many of us have committed our public lives and public service to really right size the criminal justice system. This takes us backwards, and I am opposed.
And last one I want to ask you about is Measure 25, Abolish Cash Bail. This is changing the way people get out of jail while waiting for a trial. So most, not all arrests for misdemeanors would be released within 12 hours. Those that are not released will have their risk evaluated by the courts, and the court will decide whether or not those individuals will stay behind bars. Do you
So
support
this is
or?
this is a tough one, and so this is a tweener.
Mhm.
I was co-author and supported the legislation, Senate Bill 10, that ended cash bail in California. It was a complicated bill. And at the very end, some of our friends in the criminal justice reform stakeholder community peeled off. This initiative, Prop 25, that I have officially endorsed and I've listed on the website, allows the work we did in SB 10 to go forward. There are some who I have a profound and deep respect for in the criminal justice reform community who are worried that the algorithm that's been created in lieu of cash bail continues to discriminate against people of color. That we've given the power to judges, and the algorithm they'll use, it may be more harmful than better.
Mhm.
So I've heard that argument, and I get it. Um, and so I think people should read the pros and cons. Don't just rely on the 30-second soundbite on the TV commercials. Go to the website for the pro 25, the against 25. Read the LA Times assessment of 25 and make your own decision. Um, I was proud to be a member of the legislature to take a very courageous stand when we passed Senate Bill 10 against huge opposition from the bail industry because they came for us in a
Mhm.
real way.
Oh, I can
And so it
imagine.
was important to start that conversation to say that, money bail is a problem. What we put in its place, how we fix that system is very complicated. And so, like I said, I respect those who are opposing Prop 25 because they feel that what we put in its place is equally as biased. And so people need to do their homework.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I was on the fence about myself. Uh, it does sound good on surface, but then I do see how we could be discriminated against, or just leaving the decision up to the judge.
Right, right,
So that is a concern. And then I know some people that have taken deals just to get out
right.
because they couldn't afford it.
Exactly.
And I think this will just add to that. So
It
yeah,
will.
there's some things
And
to
it's
be
really
concerned about.
complicated because there are people I respect on both sides of this argument,
Yeah, right.
who have been champions in the criminal justice reform movement. That just goes to show you how complex this issue is.
Hmm.
We all know that cash bail was wrong, but what we put in its place is going to take some fine tuning. And we're not alone. New York, Illinois, there are states all over the country who are grappling with this same issue. The good thing about it, I think, is that there is a wave of eliminating cash bail. We have to come up with an alternative system that doesn't bring more harm to more people.
And just to add to this proposition, in LA County, I think we're voting for 3 different judges, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's 3 judges on the ballot.
I voted so long ago I can't remember. It felt to me like there were more than three. It felt like there were
Okay,
more than three,
there
but I don't
and
remember.
and it may be more than 3. So with that said, voting on this should kind of coincide with also who you're putting in those seats.
And while we talk about voting and the importance of voting, we've got to talk about the importance of voting the entire ballot.
Yes,
Not just
absolutely.
president, not just DA or member of the board of supervisor, not just the propositions, but the judges. And those are really hard. And so I encourage people to look. There are so many fabulous organizations now that are doing voting recommendations. And thanks to, social media and the internet, you can do research relatively easy, but it's going to take some time and effort. But, people should figure out groups that they have, their affinity groups that they have a common belief system in. Courage Campaign, Black Women for Wellness, the League of Women Voters, Black PAC, all of these different organizations are doing this work. And so, if you Google them, you'll be able to find all kind of voting guides. And people will give you their rationale about why they're supporting perhaps one judge over another. I've heard people talk about, if a person was a public defender, then I'll support them. If they were a district attorney, I don't know. And so people have to decide, their own level of confidence about, how they want to choose judges. But it's not something we can afford to continue to skip, because they have a lot of power. And quite frankly, as a legislator, I've been passing bills to give them more power. I've
Right,
carried a number
right.
of bills to eliminate sentence enhancements,
Uh-huh.
which were kind of automatic. And we've tried to put it back in the hands of the judges so each individual judge could look at each individual case and make a decision, as opposed to have these automatic sentences that they had no control over. I think that works in our best interest. But again, we need to make sure that we have a bench and bar that has people who look like us serving, and that we have a high level of confidence in those people who are making decisions about our lives.
Absolutely. Well, Miss Senator Holly Mitchell, I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you giving me this opportunity and really engaging in these important, deep, thoughtful questions that we all have a responsibility to consider as we go to the polls now up through Tuesday, November 3rd.
Right. Well, good luck and congratulations on everything thus far.
Thank you.
Definitely a pillar in our community and well respected. So thanks again for
Oh, I
taking the
appreciate
time.
that.
And we
Thank you very
will
much. I hope you'll invite me back in the future.
absolutely, we have to. I will
Thank
talk
you.
with you soon.
All right, be well.
The Hub